There is a moment in every person's life when they catch a glimpse of who they could become if they abandon their principles. It is not a pleasant moment. It arrives uninvited, usually in the darkness of a sleepless night, or in the aftermath of a decision that cost them dearly. They see the shadow of themselves, the version that chose the easier path, the one who decided that their own comfort mattered more than the people they loved. Most people look away from this shadow. They push it down, refuse to acknowledge it, and continue living as though they never saw it at all. But the shadow remains. It waits. And sometimes, in the vast, infinite expanse of the multiverse, that shadow gets to live. It gets to breathe and think and make choices. It gets to become real. For Simon Petrikov, that shadow has a name. That shadow wears his face and speaks with his voice and sits upon a throne made of ice in a castle that should have been his prison. That shadow is the Winter King. When Fionna and Cake introduces us to the Winter King, it does so with a masterful piece of misdirection. We see Simon Petrikov, or what appears to be Simon Petrikov, ruling over the Ice Kingdom with wisdom and grace. He is beloved by his subjects. He is respected by his peers. He has Finn and Jake as his adopted children, heroes who admire him and look up to him as a father figure. Everything about this version of Simon seems to represent the happy ending that our Simon was denied. Here is a man who found a way to use the crown without losing himself. Here is a man who got to keep his mind, his identity, his sense of self, while still wielding the immense power that drove our Simon to madness. The Winter King appears to be proof that Simon's suffering was not inevitable, that there was another way, that somewhere in the infinite branches of possibility, Simon Petrikov got to win. But this is a lie. And what makes it such a devastating lie is that it contains just enough truth to be seductive. The Winter King did keep his mind. The Winter King did retain his identity and his memories and his capacity for rational thought. But the Winter King is not what Simon would have become if things had gone right. The Winter King is what Simon would have become if he had made the choice that our Simon refused to make. He is not the better outcome. He is the worse one. He is the version of Simon that our Simon spent 1,000 years fighting against, even when he no longer remembered what he was fighting for. And the horror of the Winter King is not that he is evil in some cartoonish, obvious way. The horror is that he is evil in the way that real people become evil, gradually, reasonably, one justifiable decision at a time. To understand why the Winter King represents Simon's deepest fear, we must first understand what Simon actually lost when he put on the crown. The surface level reading is simple. Simon lost his mind. The crown's magic slowly eroded his sanity, replacing his memories with delusions, his personality with the cackling madness of the Ice King. He forgot who he was. He forgot the people he loved. He became a lonely, pathetic figure, chasing princesses he didn't really want, building a kingdom of snow and penguins to fill the void where his life used to be. This reading is accurate as far as it goes, but it misses the deeper tragedy. Because what Simon really lost was not just his mind. What Simon lost was the ability to choose who he wanted to be. The crown took many things from Simon, but the cruelest thing it took was his agency. Every time Simon felt himself slipping, every time he felt the madness creeping in at the edges of his consciousness, he tried to fight it. The tapes he left for Marceline prove this. He knew what was happening to him. He could feel himself disappearing, feel his identity being erased and overwritten by something alien and cold. And he fought. He fought so hard. He made recordings so that some part of him would survive. He tried to warn the people he loved about what he was becoming. He struggled against the inevitable with everything he had. But the crown was stronger. The crown was always stronger. And so Simon had to watch, helpless and horrified, as his own hands did things he would never choose to do. He had to experience the slow murder of his own self while being powerless to stop it. This is the tragedy that defines Simon Petrikov. Not that he went mad, but that he went mad unwillingly. Not that he became the Ice King, but that he never chose to become the Ice King. The transformation was inflicted upon him. It was a violation of the deepest kind, a theft of the very thing that made him who he was. And when we understand this, we begin to understand why the Winter King is so terrifying. Because the Winter King did choose. The Winter King looked at the crown and its power and its cost, and he made a calculated decision about what he was willing to sacrifice. He decided that his mind, his precious rational mind, was worth more than the lives of the people around him. He decided that keeping himself intact was more important than being good, and in making that choice, he became something far worse than the Ice King ever was. The Ice King, for all his flaws, was innocent. He was a victim. He did terrible things, but he did them without understanding, without malice, without the capacity to comprehend the harm he was causing. There was something almost childlike about his villainy, a pathetic quality that made it impossible to truly hate him. You could pity the Ice King. You could feel sorry for him. You could look at him and see the ghost of Simon Petrikov, still trapped somewhere inside that broken mind, still fighting even though he had forgotten what he was fighting for. But you cannot pity the Winter King. You cannot feel sorry for him, because the Winter King knows exactly what he is doing. He has his mind, he has his rationality, he has the full capacity to understand the consequences of his actions, and he does them anyway. The first time we see the Winter King interact with Fionna and Cake, he presents himself as a benevolent ruler. He welcomes them into his kingdom with warmth and hospitality. He explains how he mastered the crown, how he found a way to harness its power without succumbing to its madness. He shows them his beautiful ice castle, his loyal subjects, his adopted sons Finn and Jake. Everything about him radiates success. Here is a man who figured it out. Here is a man who solved the unsolvable problem. And for a moment, even the audience wants to believe him. We want to believe that there was a way for Simon to win. We want to believe that the tragedy we watched unfold across 10 seasons of Adventure Time was not inevitable. We want to believe that somewhere, somehow, Simon got his happy ending. This desire is not accidental. The writers of Fionna and Cake understand something profound about human psychology. They understand that we want redemption stories. We want to believe that suffering has meaning, that sacrifices pay off, that good people eventually get rewarded for their goodness. And Simon Petrikov is one of the most sympathetic characters in the entire Adventure Time universe. He gave up everything. He sacrificed his mind, his identity, his chance at happiness, all to protect a little girl who was not even his own child. He deserved a happy ending more than almost anyone. So when the Winter King appears and seems to offer proof that a happy ending was possible, we want to embrace it. We want to celebrate this victory on Simon's behalf. But the show refuses to let us have this easy comfort. Slowly, methodically, it begins to peel back the layers of the Winter King's facade. And what we find underneath is not a triumph, but a horror. The Winter King did not master the crown through wisdom or virtue. He mastered it through sacrifice, But whereas Simon sacrificed himself to save others, the Winter King sacrificed others to save himself. The magic of the crown demanded a price. It always demands a price. Our Simon paid that price with his own sanity. The Winter King found a way to make someone else pay instead. This is revealed through the character of Ice Thing, the twisted creature that the Winter King keeps hidden in his basement. Ice Thing is what remains of this world's version of Betty. In our timeline, Betty sacrificed herself to save Simon, merging with Golb and giving up her existence to give him a chance at peace. But in the Winter King's timeline, Simon found a different solution. He discovered that the crown's madness could be transferred to another person. He could remain sane if he had a vessel to absorb the insanity that the crown generated. And so he took Betty, the woman who loved him, the woman who came back for him across time and space, and he made her into his container. He poured his madness into her. He kept his mind clean and sharp and functional by using her as a psychic garbage dump, and she became Ice Thing, a mindless, corrupted creature that exists only to suffer so that the Winter King can think clearly. The horror of this revelation cannot be overstated. The Winter King did not find a way to beat the crown. He found a way to victimize someone else with the crown. He looked at the terrible bargain that the crown offered, and he decided that he should not be the one to pay. He decided that his beloved Betty should pay instead. And what makes this even more disturbing is that he has clearly rationalized this decision to himself. He does not see himself as a monster. He sees himself as a survivor. He made the hard choice. He did what he had to do. He found a solution that let him continue being the person he wanted to be. Never mind that his solution required destroying the person who loved him most. Never mind that his clarity of mind was purchased with her sanity. He survived. He won. And that, in his mind, is all that matters. This is the shadow that Simon was always afraid of. Not the Ice King. The Ice King was never a choice. The Ice King was something that happened to Simon against his will. But the Winter King represents the choice that Simon could have made if he had been weaker, if he had been more selfish, if he had valued his own mind more than he valued the people around him. The Winter King is the answer to a question that Simon must have asked himself 1,000 times during those long years of descent into madness. What if I found another way? What if I did not have to lose myself? What if I could keep my mind and still survive? The Winter King shows us what that other way would have looked like, and it is monstrous. The reason this works so well as a narrative device is that it reframes everything we thought we knew about Simon's tragedy. For years, we pitied Simon because he lost his mind. We saw his sanity as the thing that was stolen from him, the precious treasure that the crown took without his consent. But the Winter King forces us to reconsider this framing. What if Simon's loss of sanity was not entirely a curse? What if, in some terrible way, it was also a protection? Because Simon, without his sanity, could not make the choices that the Winter King made. Simon, without his rationality, could not calculate the cost and benefit of sacrificing someone else. The Ice King was capable of cruelty, but it was the unfocused cruelty of madness, the cruelty of someone who did not fully understand what he was doing. The Winter King's cruelty is worse because it is precise. It is deliberate. It is the cruelty of someone who knows exactly what he is doing and has decided that he is justified in doing it. There is a philosophical concept called the banality of evil, coined by Hannah Arendt In her analysis of Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann, Arendt observed that Eichmann was not a monster in the traditional sense. He was not a sadist who took pleasure in suffering. He was a bureaucrat. He was a man who made decisions based on efficiency and self-interest, who followed orders and climbed the ladder, and never really thought about the human cost of his actions. The banality of evil is the idea that tremendous harm can be done by ordinary people who simply refuse to think about what they are doing, who prioritize their own comfort and advancement over the lives of others, who make small compromises that add up to atrocities. The Winter King embodies this concept perfectly. He is not cackling over his victims. He is not reveling in their suffering. He has simply decided that his needs matter more than theirs, and he has arranged his life accordingly. One of the most chilling aspects of the Winter King is how reasonable he sounds when he explains himself. He does not present his actions as evil. He presents them as practical. He found a solution to an impossible problem. He made the best of a bad situation. He survived when survival seemed impossible. And there is a part of us that wants to accept this framing, because it is the same framing that we use to justify our own compromises. We all make choices that prioritize our own well-being over the well-being of others. We all find ways to rationalize the small harms we cause in pursuit of our own goals. The Winter King is simply operating on a larger scale. He is doing what we all do, just more efficiently and with higher stakes. This is what makes him such an effective villain. He holds up a mirror to the audience and asks us to consider where we draw the line. How much would you sacrifice to keep your mind? How much would you give up to remain yourself? If you were slowly losing everything that made you who you are, and someone offered you a way out that only required hurting one other person, would you take it? Most of us want to believe that we would not. Most of us want to believe that we would choose suffering over causing suffering, that we would accept our fates rather than pass it on to someone we love. But the Winter King represents the voice in our head that whispers the opposite, the voice that says survival matters more than morality, the voice that says you deserve to live, to think, to be yourself, and anyone who gets in the way of that is simply collateral damage. The Winter King's relationship with Finn and Jake in his universe further illustrates this point. He has adopted them as his sons. He has raised them to be heroes. He has given them purpose and direction and a loving home. On the surface, this seems like a point in his favour. See, he is capable of love. See, he is capable of nurturing and protecting others. But when we look closer, we realise that his relationship with Finn and Jake is just another extension of his fundamental selfishness. He adopted them because he wanted children. He raised them to be heroes because it served his purposes. He loves them, perhaps, but it is the love of an owner for a prized possession, not the love of an equal for another equal. When push comes to shove, when his survival is threatened, we see exactly how much Finn and Jake mean to him. They are expendable. They are tools. They are useful as long as they serve his needs, and the moment they stop being useful, they stop mattering. This contrasts sharply with our Simon's relationship with Marceline. Simon loved Marceline unconditionally. He protected her, not because it served his interests, but despite the fact that it destroyed them. He kept putting on the crown, kept accelerating his own deterioration, because he could not bear to let her come to harm. He chose her over himself again and again and again, until there was no self left to choose. His love was sacrificial in the truest sense of the word. He gave up everything he had. so that she could survive. The Winter King would never make this choice. The Winter King cannot make this choice because his entire existence is built on the opposite principle. He survives by taking from others, not by giving to them. His love is conditional on his own needs being met first. And this fundamental difference is what separates a hero from a villain, a good person from a bad one. The show makes this contrast explicit through the parallel between Betty and Ice Thing, and between Marceline and Finn and Jake. In our timeline, Betty sacrificed herself for Simon. She merged with Golb, gave up her existence, all because she could not bear to see him suffer. Her love was as unconditional as Simon's love for Marceline. She gave everything for him. But in the Winter King's timeline, the opposite happened. Simon sacrificed Betty for himself. He took her love and her devotion and her willingness to do anything for him, and he used it against her. He exploited the very depth of her feeling to destroy her. Because someone who loves you that much is vulnerable. Someone who loves you that much can be manipulated, and the Winter King saw that vulnerability not as something to be honoured and protected, but as something to be used. This is perhaps the darkest aspect of the Winter King's character. He did not victimize a stranger. He did not sacrifice some random person who meant nothing to him. He sacrificed the person who loved him most in all the world. He took Betty's devotion, a devotion so profound that she crossed time and space to find him, and he turned it into a chain. He used her love as the mechanism of her destruction. And this tells us something essential about who the Winter King really is. He is someone who sees love as a resource to be exploited. He is someone who looks at another person's vulnerability and sees an opportunity. He is incapable of the kind of mutual, equal, self-giving love that defines genuine human connection. He can receive love, he can enjoy being loved, but he cannot return it. Not really, not in any way that requires him to sacrifice his own interests. Our Simon was the opposite. Our Simon was so capable of love that it destroyed him. He loved Marceline so much that he gave up his sanity to protect her. He loved Betty so much that he carried the guilt of her loss for centuries, even when he could not remember exactly what he had lost. The Ice King's obsession with princesses was a corrupted echo of this capacity for love, a twisted remnant of a heart that was built to care deeply and forever. Simon's great virtue was his ability to love others more than himself, and the Winter King's great sin is his inability to do the same. He loves himself most. He loves himself first. He loves himself only. And everything else, everyone else, is just a means to the end of his own survival and comfort. There is a moment in the confrontation between Simon and the Winter King that crystallizes everything the show is trying to say about these two characters. Simon looks at the Winter King, at this version of himself that kept his mind and his power and his throne, and he feels something unexpected. He feels horror, not envy, not longing, not a desperate wish that he could have had what the Winter King has. Horror, because Simon understands, perhaps better than anyone, what it would have taken to become the Winter King. He understands the choices that would have been required, the compromises that would have been necessary, the fundamental betrayal of everything he believed in that would have had to occur. And when he looks at the Winter King, he does not see a better version of himself. He sees a worse one. He sees the man he would have become if he had given up on being good. This is a crucial insight into Simon's character. For so long, Simon has been defined by what he lost. He lost his mind. He lost his memories. He lost his sense of self. He lost the woman he loved. He lost centuries of his life to madness and confusion and pathetic, futile grasping at things he did not understand. When Simon finally got his mind back, when Betty's sacrifice restored him to himself, he was confronted with the full weight of everything that had been taken from him. And it would have been easy, so easy, for him to fall into bitterness. It would have been understandable if he had raged against the unfairness of it all, if he had demanded to know why he had to suffer so much, if he had wished desperately that things could have been different. And maybe part of him did. Maybe part of him still does. But when Simon meets the Winter King, he is forced to confront the reality of what different would have looked like, and he realizes that he would not want it. He would not trade his suffering for what the Winter King has, because what the Winter King has is hollow. It is empty. It is a crown and a throne and a clear mind, but it is all built on a foundation of betrayal and exploitation. The Winter King has everything that Simon lost, but he has it because he was willing to become someone that Simon would never choose to be. And Simon, for all his trauma, for all his grief, for all the centuries of pain that he endured, is still, fundamentally, himself. He is still the man who would sacrifice everything to protect a child. He is still the man who would rather lose his mind than harm someone he loved. He is still good. The crown took almost everything from him, but it could not take that. This realization is a kind of victory for Simon, though it is a quiet and painful one. He did not choose his suffering. He would not have chosen it if given the option. But in the absence of choice, in the chaos and madness and loss, he still managed to hold on to the core of who he was. He remained capable of love. He remained capable of sacrifice. He remained someone worth being. The Winter King chose his path, and look what it made him. Simon had his path forced upon him, and somehow he emerged still capable of recognizing evil, still capable of being horrified by cruelty, still capable of feeling compassion for Ice Thing and disgust at what the Winter King did to create her. The crown broke Simon's mind, but it could not break his heart. And in the end, the heart matters more. The philosophical implications of this are profound. We often think of identity as being constituted by our minds, by our memories, by our capacity for rational thought. When we imagine losing ourselves, we imagine dementia or amnesia or some other form of cognitive decline. We imagine forgetting who we are, forgetting the people we love, losing the thread of our own story. And this is a legitimate fear. These are real losses that cause real suffering. But the Winter King suggests that there is something worse than losing your mind. There is losing your soul. There is remaining perfectly rational, perfectly lucid, perfectly aware, while becoming someone monstrous. The Winter King remembers everything. He understands everything. He can think clearly and plan effectively and analyze situations with precision. But none of that matters because he has lost the capacity to be good. He has sacrificed his virtue on the altar of his intellect, and intellect without virtue is just a more efficient way of being cruel. Simon's madness, viewed from this angle, takes on a different meaning. Yes, it was a tragedy. Yes, it caused immense suffering to Simon and to everyone who loved him. But it also preserved something essential about who Simon was. The Ice King was pathetic and confused and often harmful, but he was not evil. He did not make calculated decisions to hurt people for his own benefit. He stumbled through his existence, causing damage, but it was the damage of chaos, not the damage of intention. And when Simon was finally restored, when the madness lifted and he could see clearly again, he found that his core self had survived. The 1,000 years of confusion had not corrupted him. He was still capable of love. He was still capable of shame for the harm he had caused. He was still recognizably Simon Petrikov, the man who had put on a crown to save a little girl, even though he knew it would destroy him. The Winter King has no such continuity. The Winter King is Simon Petrikov, in name and memory only. The essential self, the part that makes someone worth being, has been hollowed out and replaced with something cold and calculating. He wears Simon's face and speaks with Simon's voice and has access to all of Simon's memories, but he is not Simon. He is what happens when you sacrifice everything except your ability to think. He is a mind without a heart, an intellect without compassion, a survivor without a soul. And Simon, looking at him, understands that he would rather be the Ice King. He would rather be the confused, lonely, pathetic figure who chased princesses and talked to penguins and could not remember why he felt so sad. Because at least the Ice King was innocent. At least the Ice King was not culpable for his actions. At least the Ice King had the excuse of madness. The relationship between the Winter King and Ice Thing serves as the moral center of everything the show is trying to say about these characters. Ice Thing is Betty. Or rather, Ice Thing is what remains of Betty after the Winter King used her as a repository for his madness. She is a creature of twisted ice and corrupted magic, barely recognizable as human, reduced to an animalistic state where she can only babble and stumble and exist in perpetual confusion. The Winter King keeps her hidden in his basement like a shameful secret, occasionally checking on her to ensure that she is still functional, still capable of absorbing the madness that would otherwise cloud his precious mind. He does not torture her. He does not take pleasure in her suffering. He simply uses her the way you might use a tool or an appliance, without thinking about whether the tool has feelings or preferences or a desire to be something other than what it is being made to be. This is important because it reveals the true nature of the Winter King's evil. He is not a sadist. He does not enjoy causing pain. If he could have found a way to keep his mind without hurting Betty, he probably would have taken it. But he could not find another way, or perhaps he did not try hard enough to find one, and so he made the choice that benefited him at her expense. His evil is not the hot evil of rage or cruelty. It is the cold evil of indifference. He simply does not care enough about Betty to let her suffering stop him from doing what he wants to do. She is less important than he is. Her mind is less valuable than his mind. Her happiness matters less than his clarity. These are the calculations he made, consciously or unconsciously, and he has lived with them ever since. The word for this, in philosophical terms, is objectification. The Winter King has turned Betty into an object, not a person with her own desires and rights and inherent worth, but a thing that exists to serve his purposes. This is the fundamental sin that underlies all of his other sins. Before he could sacrifice Betty, he had to stop seeing her as fully human. He had to convince himself that his needs mattered more than hers, that his mind was more important than her mind, that his survival justified her destruction. And once you make that move, once you decide that another person is less valuable than yourself, everything else follows naturally. You can do anything to an object. Objects do not have rights. Objects exist to be used. Our Simon never made this move. Even at his most desperate, even as the crown tightened its grip on his sanity, he never treated Marceline as an object. He never decided that his survival was more important than her well-being. Every choice he made was aimed at protecting her, even when those choices accelerated his own decline. He put her needs first. He treated her as a full person, deserving of care and protection and sacrifice. And this is why, despite losing everything else, Simon never lost his fundamental goodness. He never crossed the line that the Winter King crossed. He never looked at another person and saw only a resource to be exploited. The encounter between Simon and Ice Thing is one of the most emotionally devastating moments in Fionna and Cake. Simon looks at this creature, this twisted remnant of the woman who loved him in another universe, and he is overwhelmed with grief and horror. He sees what his counterpart did to her. He understands the choice that the Winter King made, and he feels responsible in some cosmic sense for her suffering because Ice Thing is Betty. And Betty loved Simon, or the version of Simon that existed in her universe. She loved him enough to cross time and space, enough to sacrifice everything, enough to become whatever he needed her to become. And this is how that love was repaid. This is what her devotion earned her: abasement, a curse, an existence of mindless suffering, while the man she loved sits on a throne above her, enjoying the clarity that her torment provides. Simon cannot save Ice Thing. This is one of the most painful aspects of the encounter. He wants to help her. He feels the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, the sense that he should be able to do something, to fix this somehow, to atone for the sins of his counterpart. But Ice Thing is too far gone. The damage that has been done to her is too severe to be undone. She cannot be restored to who she was. She can only be ended, released from her suffering through death rather than through healing. And Simon has to reckon with this. He has to accept that some harm cannot be repaired, that some cruelty leaves wounds that will never heal, that the Winter King's choice destroyed something that can never be brought back. This is a mature and difficult message for a television show to deliver. We want our heroes to fix things. We want our stories to end with restoration, with healing, with the undoing of the damage that the villains have caused. But Fionna and Cake refuses this easy comfort. It insists that some choices have permanent consequences. The Winter King's decision to sacrifice Betty cannot be undone by defeating the Winter King. Ice Thing cannot be saved by some magical intervention or last-minute reversal. The harm has been done. The destruction is complete. All that remains is to acknowledge the tragedy, to bear witness to what was lost, and to carry that weight forward into whatever comes next. The Winter King's castle tells us everything we need to know about the life he has built for himself. It is beautiful. It is orderly. It is a monument to control and precision and the triumph of will over chaos. Where the Ice King's domain was a mess of random rooms and confused architecture, reflecting the scattered mind of its creator, the Winter King's castle is a masterpiece of design. Every corridor leads somewhere purposeful. Every room serves a function. Every detail has been considered and optimized and placed with intention. This is the home of a man who has mastered his environment, who has imposed his vision on the world around him, who refuses to let anything exist in his presence that does not conform to his expectations. And this is precisely what makes it so disturbing, because the Winter King's obsession with control is not limited to architecture. It extends to everything and everyone around him. His subjects exist to serve him. His adopted sons exist to fulfill roles he has assigned to them. His kingdom exists as an extension of his will, a physical manifestation of his belief that the world should bend to his desires. The Winter King cannot tolerate chaos because chaos threatens his carefully constructed reality. He cannot accept that other people might have needs and desires that conflict with his own. He has built a prison disguised as a paradise, and he sits at its center like a spider in a web, perfectly positioned to detect and eliminate any disturbance to his perfect order. This is another dimension of the contrast between the Winter King and our Simon. Simon, in his Ice King incarnation, was surrounded by chaos. His life was a mess. His relationships were dysfunctional. His plans never worked. His kingdom was a joke. But this chaos, as painful as it was, reflected something important about Simon's relationship with the world. He could not control things because he was not trying to control things in the truly destructive sense. The Ice King wanted love. He wanted connection. He wanted princesses to like him, not because he wanted to dominate them, but because he was desperately lonely and did not know how to form genuine relationships. His failures were the failures of someone who had lost the tools for healthy interaction, not someone who had deliberately chosen manipulation over connection. The Winter King does not want love, or rather, he wants the appearance of love without any of its substance. He wants Finn and Jake to admire him, but he does not want to be vulnerable with them. He wants his subjects to adore him, but he does not want to serve their needs. He wants Betty to exist for him, but he has no interest in her existing as herself. Every relationship in the Winter King's life is a one-way street. He receives, he never gives. He takes what he needs from others and offers nothing in return except the privilege of being allowed to remain in his presence. This is not love. This is not even a functional imitation of love. It is predation dressed up in the language of affection. The psychological term for this pattern is narcissism, though the Winter King represents an extreme form that goes beyond the clinical definition. He has constructed an entire reality around the premise that he is the only person who truly matters. Everyone else exists in relation to him as satellites orbiting the central sun of his importance. Their value is determined entirely by their utility to him. When they serve his purposes, they are rewarded with his attention and approval. When they fail to serve his purposes, they are discarded or punished or transformed into something more useful. There is no room in the Winter King's world for the genuine otherness of other people. There is only room for extensions of himself. This is why the Winter King cannot understand Simon's choices. When he looks at our Simon, he sees a fool. He sees someone who had the same options he had and chose the worse one. He sees someone who sacrificed his mind for a child who was not even his own, who spent centuries in confused agony when he could have found another way, who gave up everything when he could have kept everything by simply being willing to let someone else pay the price. The Winter King cannot comprehend why Simon would make these choices, because the Winter King cannot comprehend genuine love. He cannot imagine valuing another person enough to sacrifice yourself for them. He cannot imagine looking at a child and feeling that her life matters more than your sanity. He cannot imagine love as anything other than a transaction, a calculation, a weighing of costs and benefits that should always come out in your own favour. And Simon, looking at the Winter King, sees something equally incomprehensible. He sees a man who has everything he lost and who has nothing he kept. He sees a man with a clear mind and an empty heart. He sees a man who solved the puzzle of the crown by cheating, by refusing to play by the rules that make life meaningful, by deciding that victory matters more than virtue. Simon cannot understand how anyone could make the choices the Winter King made, because Simon cannot imagine being the kind of person for whom those choices would make sense. They are alien to each other, these two versions of the same man. They share a face and a history and a name, but they are as different as two people can possibly be. There is a question that haunts the narrative of Fionna and Cake, a question that the show never explicitly asks, but that underlies every interaction between Simon and the Winter King. The question is this: at what point did they diverge? At what moment did the Winter King make the choice that our Simon refused to make? Was there a single decision, a clear fork in the road where one Simon went left and the other went right? Or was it a gradual accumulation of small compromises, tiny moral failures that added up over time until the Winter King looked in the mirror and no longer recognized the man he had become? The show suggests that the answer is both. There was probably a moment of decision, a point where the Winter King discovered that he could transfer his madness to Betty and chose to do so, but that moment did not come out of nowhere. It was prepared for by years of small choices, small failures of empathy, small prioritizations of self over others. The Winter King did not wake up one day and decide to become a monster. He drifted into monstrosity gradually, one justifiable decision at a time, until he had drifted so far that turning back seemed impossible. This is how most evil works in the real world. Very few people set out to become villains. Very few people make a conscious choice to abandon their principles and embrace cruelty. Instead, they make small compromises. They tell themselves that this one exception does not really count. They convince themselves that the circumstances justify actions they would normally condemn. They rationalize and excuse and explain away, and with each rationalization, they move a little further from who they used to be. The Winter King is the end point of this process. He is what happens when you let the small compromises accumulate until they become your entire identity. Our Simon resisted this process. Even as the crown eroded his mind, even as his capacity for rational decision-making was stripped away, he managed to avoid the slide into genuine evil. The Ice King did harmful things, but he did them without malice, without calculation, without the kind of deliberate cruelty that characterizes true villainy. And when Simon was restored to himself, he did not emerge as someone who had been corrupted by his time as the Ice King. He emerged as someone who had been preserved, somehow, against all odds, with his fundamental goodness intact. This suggests that there was something in Simon, some core of moral commitment, that the crown could not touch. The crown could take his memories, it could take his rationality, it could take his understanding of who he was and what he was doing, but it could not take his basic orientation toward goodness, his instinctive tendency to protect rather than exploit, to love rather than use. This core survived everything the crown threw at it. It survived 1,000 years of madness. It survived the transformation into a completely different person. And when the madness lifted, it was still there, waiting to be reactivated, ready to guide Simon back to himself. The Winter King never had this core, or, if he had it, he sacrificed it, along with everything else. His decision to victimize Betty was not an aberration, not a single moment of weakness in an otherwise virtuous life. It was the logical culmination of who he had always been, someone who put himself first, someone who saw other people as means to his ends, someone whose love was always conditional on his own needs being met. The crown did not corrupt the Winter King. The crown revealed him. It offered him a choice that our Simon would never have made, and he made it, and in making it, he showed us who he had been all along. This reading of the Winter King is important because it complicates the narrative of the crown as a purely external evil. In Adventure Time proper, we are encouraged to see the crown as the villain, as the corrupting influence that transformed a good man into a pathetic monster. And this reading is not wrong. The crown did corrupt Simon. It did steal his mind. It did cause immeasurable suffering to him and everyone who loved him. But Fionna and Cake adds a layer to this narrative by showing us that the crown's corruption is not uniform. Different people respond to the crown differently based on who they already are. Our Simon responded by losing his mind but keeping his soul. The Winter King responded by keeping his mind but losing his soul. The crown did not determine these outcomes. The crown revealed them. There is a tragic irony in the fact that the Winter King believes himself to be the superior version of Simon. He looks at our Simon and sees failure. He sees a man who could not solve the problem, who let the crown defeat him, who spent centuries as a drooling madman instead of finding a way to maintain his dignity and power. The Winter King is proud of what he accomplished. He is proud of his clear mind, his beautiful kingdom, his control over the crown's power. He has convinced himself that he is the version of Simon who won, the version who figured it out, the version who refused to be a victim. But this pride is built on a foundation of delusion. The Winter King has not won. He has merely chosen a different form of losing. Our Simon lost his mind, but remained capable of love, connection, and redemption. The Winter King kept his mind, but lost everything that makes a mind worth having. He can think clearly, but what does he think about? He can plan effectively, but what does he plan for? He can analyze situations with precision, but his analysis always leads him to the same conclusion. He should get what he wants, and everyone else should accommodate him. His mind is a powerful engine, running in an empty circle, generating nothing of value, serving no purpose beyond its own perpetuation. The Winter King's kingdom is a testament to this emptiness. Yes, it is orderly. Yes, it is beautiful. Yes, it functions smoothly and efficiently. But what is it for? What does it produce? What value does it add to the world? The Winter King has no answer to these questions, because he has never thought to ask them. His kingdom exists to serve him, to glorify him, to demonstrate his power and competence. It has no purpose beyond its ruler's ego. It produces nothing except more of itself. It is a closed loop of narcissism, a system designed to feed the Winter King's sense of importance without ever contributing anything to anyone else. Compare this to what Simon built during his time as the Ice King. Yes, the Ice Kingdom was a mess. Yes, the Ice King's projects were confused and often harmful. But there was something generative about the Ice King's chaos, something creative and open-ended that the Winter King's perfect order lacks. The Ice King made things. He wrote fan fiction. He composed songs. He built elaborate contraptions that did not work. He pursued projects that made no sense to anyone but himself. He was pathetic, but he was alive. He was engaged with the world in a way that the Winter King is not. The Winter King has achieved stasis, a perfect equilibrium of control that admits no growth, no change, no genuine creation. He is maintaining a system, not living a life. This is the trap of the kind of rationality the Winter King represents. Pure rationality, untempered by emotion or connection or values beyond self-interest, tends toward a kind of death. It optimizes and optimizes until there is nothing left to optimize for. It achieves its goals and then discovers that its goals were empty, that the whole project was pointless, that a life spent maximizing your own welfare at the expense of everyone else is a life spent in a very comfortable prison. The Winter King has everything he ever wanted, and he has nothing. He has power without purpose, control without meaning, survival without life. Our Simon has the opposite problem. He has purpose and meaning and genuine life, but he has lost so much along the way. He carries the weight of centuries of confused actions. He grieves for Betty, for the time he lost, for the person he might have been if the crown had never entered his life. His existence is painful in ways that the Winter King's existence is not. But it is also richer. It contains genuine relationships, genuine growth, genuine connection to others. Simon is capable of joy because he is capable of loss. He is capable of meaning because he is capable of sacrifice. He is alive in a way that the Winter King is not and never will be. The final confrontation between Simon and the Winter King is not a battle of strength or magic or strategy. It is a battle of values. The Winter King believes that he can convince Simon to see things his way. He believes that if he just explains his reasoning clearly enough, Simon will understand that he made the right choice. After all, his choice worked. He survived. He kept his mind. He built a kingdom. What more proof could anyone need that his approach was correct? The Winter King cannot imagine that anyone who truly understood his position would reject it. He cannot imagine that Simon might look at everything he has accomplished and still judge him a failure. But that is exactly what Simon does. He looks at the Winter King's kingdom and sees a prison. He looks at the Winter King's clarity and sees emptiness. He looks at the Winter King's survival and sees a form of death. And he tells the Winter King this, not with anger or condemnation, but with something worse. Pity. Simon pities the Winter King. He feels sorry for him. And this, more than anything else, is what the Winter King cannot tolerate. He can handle hatred, he can handle fear, he can handle opposition and conflict and even defeat. But he cannot handle being pitied by someone he considers inferior. He cannot handle the idea that our Simon, the version who lost, the version who spent centuries as a madman, might look at him with compassion and sorrow rather than envy and admiration. This is the narcissist's ultimate vulnerability. The narcissist has constructed their entire identity around being special, around being superior, around being the one who figured it out while everyone else floundered. When someone sees through this construction, when someone recognizes the emptiness behind the facade, the narcissist's entire world threatens to collapse. The Winter King has spent his whole life telling himself a story about who he is and why his choices were justified. Simon's pity threatens to rewrite that story. It threatens to transform him from a triumphant survivor into a cautionary tale. It threatens to reveal him not as the winner, but as the greatest loser of all. The Winter King's response to this threat is rage. He cannot argue with Simon's pity because argument requires engaging with the possibility that you might be wrong, and the Winter King cannot engage with this possibility without his identity falling apart. So he attacks instead. He tries to destroy Simon, not because Simon is a threat to his kingdom or his power, but because Simon is a threat to his self-image. Simon's very existence, his survival with his goodness intact, is an accusation that the Winter King cannot answer. If Simon could endure what he endured and still emerge as a person worth being, then the Winter King's choices were not necessary. They were not justified. They were simply wrong. This is the heart of what makes the Winter King such a compelling antagonist. He is not evil because he enjoys being evil. He is evil because he cannot afford to acknowledge that he has been evil. His entire sense of self depends on his choices being right, on his path being the correct one, on his survival being worth the price he paid for it. If he admits, even for a moment, that he did something unforgivable to Betty, that his clear mind was purchased with her suffering, that he is the villain of his own story, then he has nothing left. He has no foundation on which to stand, and so he will defend his choices to the death. He will attack anyone who questions them. He will destroy anyone who threatens to expose the truth, not because he believes he is right, but because he cannot survive being wrong. What the Winter King ultimately teaches us is that sanity without virtue is worthless. We live in a culture that often valorizes intelligence, rationality, and mental acuity above other qualities. We admire people who think clearly, who analyze situations effectively, who maintain their composure under pressure. We fear mental illness, cognitive decline, the loss of our ability to reason and remember and understand. And these fears are not irrational. Our minds are precious. Our capacity for thought is what makes us who we are. But the Winter King reminds us that a mind can be preserved while everything valuable about a person is destroyed. The Winter King thinks clearly. He thinks more clearly than our Simon, who is often confused and overwhelmed by the trauma of his past. But what good is the Winter King's clarity? It serves only himself. It produces nothing of value for anyone else. It is a tool that has become its own purpose, a capacity that has forgotten what it was supposed to be used for. The Winter King is like a perfectly maintained engine that is not connected to anything, running smoothly and efficiently while accomplishing absolutely nothing. His mind is intact, but his life is empty. Our Simon, by contrast, has a mind that is scarred and damaged and often painful to inhabit. He struggles with memories that do not fit together, with guilt for actions he committed while not himself, with the challenge of rebuilding a life after centuries of chaos. His mind is not a pristine instrument. It is a battlefield marked by the evidence of a long war that he only barely survived. But Simon uses his battered mind to love. He uses it to connect with others. He uses it to grieve for Betty, to care for Marceline, to build new relationships in his strange new life. His mind serves a purpose beyond itself, and that makes all the difference. The choice between Simon and the Winter King is not a choice between sanity and madness. It is a choice between two different kinds of value, two different visions of what a human life is for. The Winter King believes that life is about survival, about maintaining yourself against the forces that would destroy you, about winning the game at any cost. Our Simon believes that life is about connection, about love, about sacrificing yourself for others when sacrifice is required. These visions are incompatible. You cannot pursue both at once, and the show makes clear which vision it endorses. Simon's path was harder. Simon's path involved more suffering, more loss, more pain than the Winter King's path. But Simon's path was right. Not because suffering is good for its own sake, but because suffering in service of love is meaningful in a way that survival for its own sake can never be. Simon suffered because he loved Marceline too much to abandon her. He suffered because he could not bear to sacrifice Betty, even when sacrificing her would have saved his mind. He suffered because he was good, because his goodness made him vulnerable, because being a genuinely loving person in a harsh world inevitably involves pain. The Winter King avoided this pain. He found a way to insulate himself from the cost of caring about others. But in doing so, he lost the capacity to truly care. He lost the ability to love in any meaningful sense. He lost his connection to the rest of humanity. and became something cold and isolated and ultimately pathetic. His survival is its own punishment. His clarity is its own prison. He has exactly what he wanted, and it turns out that what he wanted was nothing worth having. This is the message at the heart of the Winter King's story. It is a warning against the seduction of self-interest, against the temptation to prioritize your own survival over your connections to others. It is a reminder that the things that make life difficult, love and vulnerability and the willingness to sacrifice, are also the things that make life meaningful. The Winter King took the easy path, and the easy path led him to a beautiful kingdom where nothing matters and no one really cares about anyone else. Simon took the hard path, and the hard path led him through centuries of suffering to a place where he can still feel joy, still form connections, still be a person worth knowing. When Simon looks at the Winter King, he sees who he was afraid of becoming, but he also sees who he never became. He sees the road not taken, the choice not made, the version of himself that he successfully avoided despite everything. And in that moment, Simon can finally understand his own journey. Not as a tragedy of things lost, but as a triumph of things preserved. The crown took almost everything from him, but it could not take his capacity to love, and in the end, that capacity is all that matters.